The headset felt clammy on Jim's ears, the weight strangely oppressive. It wasn't even an actual headset, more like a headband. The thin, sleek circlet pulsed a faint blue, and that's how he knew they were listening in again. The aliens with their unpronounceable names and their absurd business venture. "Jim," a tinny voice filtered through the headset. "Incoming call." Jim braced himself. It had been 3 weeks since he'd stumbled across the Help Wanted ad, intrigued by the promise of out-of-this-world pay. The interview with a tentacled, seven-eyed being named something like Blurg should have been his first clue, but the paycheck had 6 figures and Jim's rent was past due. "Greetings, valued client of Xylostar Vacations," Jim began, his voice an overly robotic tone because of the dread pooling in his gut. "How can I assist you today?" "Assist me?" roared a voice like gravel down a drainpipe. "I demand a refund. This was the absolute worst trip imaginable." Jim stifled a groan. Here we go again. "Sir, could you specify the location and general time frame of your unfortunate experience?" He clicked open the refund request form, but his stomach was already churning. Unfortunate. It was more than unfortunate. It was disastrous. Do you know where you sent me? The Cretaceous period. It was supposed to be predator and prey, a little thrill, you know. But all I got were ferns? Ferns. Jim blinked. Ferns, sir. Enormous ferns, the grumpy client grumbled, a note of awe creeping into his voice. Bigger than my transport pod. Nothing but ferns, munching herbivores, and insufferable humidity. They didn't even have flowers. How is that exciting? I do apologise, sir, Jim stammered, trying not to imagine skyscraper-sized ferns. This is certainly unexpected. Perhaps there was an error in temporal coordinates? Error, the client bellowed. I paid extra for the VIP Apex Predators package, and you stick me in the middle of the freaking salad bar. Jim could practically see Blurg and his colleagues writhing their tentacles in dismay. Xylostar Vacations was built to give thrill-seeker alien species a taste of Earth's most adrenaline-pumping moments in history, which, unfortunately, tended to mean natural disasters, bloody wars, or mass extinctions. It's not exactly the relaxing getaways most vacationers would imagine. "Let me consult with my supervisor," Jim said quickly. "Can I please have your booking reference number?" The client rattled off a string of guttural sounds. As Jim typed, his frown deepened. That number looked awfully familiar. Mr. Cragner?" Jim hesitated, feeling a pang of sympathy. "I believe you might have, misread the brochure. See, the Apex Predators package actually refers to the apex of the food chain, not literal apex predators." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Let me get this straight," Cragner finally rumbled, his voice dangerously low. "You're telling me I paid a fortune to be dropped amidst giant vegetables instead of a battlefield of razor-toothed monsters?" "I wouldn't call them vegetables," Jim started, then mentally kicked himself. He cleared his throat. "Look, Mr. Cragner, I understand your frustration. Let me see what I can do about a partial refund, and maybe we can offer a complimentary visit to, say, the fall of the Roman Empire." "The fall of the Roman Empire?" Cragner's voice held a new, dangerous edge. "Is that some kind of gladiator arena? Finally, a bit of the action I signed up for." Jim gulped. It was about to get a whole lot worse. "Well, technically," he winced, remembering his 7th grade history lessons. "It's more about the decline and a lot of political backstabbing." He could practically hear the aliens seething through the line. "Listen here, human," Cragner spat. "My mandibles are itching for a fight, and my thorax is built for battle. Do you have any clue what it's like to be a Klaxian warrior trapped in an office cubicle, crunching data instead of skulls?" This vacation was my one chance to cut loose. Jim felt a surge of unexpected empathy. He could certainly relate to the feeling of being trapped in a job he hated. "I completely understand, Mr. Cragner," he began earnestly. "But honestly, human history can be pretty brutal in its own ways. How about we try something less violent?" "Less violent?" Cragner scoffed. "What could possibly satisfy a warrior's heart without bloodshed?" Jim chewed on his lip. These aliens had a seriously warped idea of tourism. But his paycheck depended on keeping this customer on the line. Inspiration struck. "What about a music festival?" he ventured. "Something from a future time period, perhaps. There must be an equivalent of our rock concerts. Right?" Silence descended. Then a rumbling sound that Jim hoped was the Klaxian version of contemplation. A gathering of musicians, loud sounds, the surge of an excited crowd. Cragner mused slowly. "It lacks the thrill of combat, but it might just have the chaos I crave." A flicker of hope ignited in Jim's chest. Could he actually salvage this situation? "Let me look up some options," he said brightly, fingers flying over his keyboard. "How about the legendary Gothaxnian Death Metal Festival in the year 4568? I hear the mosh pits are something else." The guttural growl that erupted from the communicator made Jim jump. "The Death Metal Festival?" Cragner boomed. "Now you're speaking my language, human. The screaming vocals, the bone-shattering riffs, crowd surfing over spiky appendages. Why didn't you suggest this in the first place?" Jim grinned. Maybe he wasn't such a terrible customer service rep after all. "Excellent choice, Mr. Cragner. Let me just rebook your package." "Wait." Cragner's voice held a new, almost giddy note. "While you're at it, why not throw in one of those food sampling excursions you humans are always on about? I heard your planet has something called pizza. Sounds appropriately barbaric." Jim blinked, momentarily thrown off guard by the unexpected request. "Pizza and a death metal concert. Are you sure, Mr. Cragner?" "Of course, what warrior doesn't refuel after a glorious battle?" The alien's laughter reverberated through the headset. "Now that, human, is what I call a vacation." As Jim typed in the new itinerary, a strange sense of pride warmed him. Maybe this job wasn't just about refunds and complaints after all. Maybe he could actually help these aliens experience something new, even if their idea of new meant deafening music and potentially dangerous food. "So, Mr. Cragner, the Gothaxnian Death Metal Chaos of Destruction Festival, pizza feast, and a souvenir T-shirt to remind you of it all," Jim confirmed. "Your total comes to—" "Book it," Cragner cut in. "And tell your superiors they've got themselves one satisfied customer. Just try not to send the next vacationer to the Age of Ferns. Though, I hear the salads are quite something." Jim hung up, a chuckle escaping his lips. Ferns, death metal, and pizza. Sounds like a recipe for the perfect alien vacation. And who knew, perhaps he even had a knack for intergalactic travel planning. Just as Jim leaned back with a sigh of relief, the headset pulsed again. Blurg's voice was strained, a distinct tremor amidst the usual static. "Jim, you have another incoming call. I believe it's best if you prepare yourself." Jim's stomach did a flip-flop. "What's the issue this time? Another misplaced dinosaur enthusiast?" "It's not about dinos," Blurg hesitated, his multi-layered voice crackling with uncertainty. It's regarding a destination that doesn't appear in our approved timelines." An icy wave of dread washed over Jim. "As in, a destination that shouldn't exist?" "Precisely," Blurg sounded distinctly unnerved. "The analytics readout is quite insistent the customer was sent to the year 2024. Jim's blood ran cold. 2024, that was now. His pulse quickened in his ears. This wasn't a misplaced alien. This was... Could it be some sort of system malfunction? he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Negative, Blurg replied grimly. We're detecting a very real temporal anomaly. It seems an unauthorized jump has occurred, and it's centered near your location, Jim. His fingers tightened around his mouse. Location? You mean on Earth? Right now? Well, it's kind of more like Earth adjacent, Blurg hesitated. The client is demanding to speak with management, which would be me, but tentacle-to-face communication might not go over well in this case. Jim's mind raced. This went way beyond fern enthusiasts and gladiatorial disappointments. A ripple in the timeline, an alien potentially loose in his own time. This was the kind of stuff that ended in government agencies and men in black suits. Or worse, whatever was the alien equivalent. Jim, Blurg's voice was filled with an urgency that sent a shiver down his spine. You need to handle this. Do whatever you can to appease the client, find out which species we're dealing with, and assure them this has been a horrible misunderstanding. But what do I do? I mean, this person may exist in two places simultaneously. Jim felt panic rising in his throat. Just remember, Blurg said, a hint of desperation in his usually indecipherable tone. This blunder on behalf of Xylostar Vacations must remain a secret at all costs. We don't want our time travel license revoked. Jim took a deep, steadying breath. This was bigger than refunds and angry warrior aliens. This was, well, he wasn't quite sure what it was, but it was definitely on a scale beyond his pay grade. Okay, Blurg, he said, his voice surprisingly steady. Patch them through. The headset pulsed as the connection shifted. A moment later, a new voice filled his ears, smooth, melodious, and uncomfortably familiar. Hello? Can you hear me? I'm using my earpiece. Hello? The voice was hesitant, a bit confused, but undeniably female and distinctly human. Jim froze. That voice. He knew that voice. Emily, he whispered, eyes widening in disbelief. It's me, Jim Sampson. Jim? Emily's voice wavered with shock. Is that you? Jim from high school chemistry? The one who accidentally set fire to Mr. Jenkins' toupee? Jim could have sworn his heart skipped a beat. Emily Martin was his first crush, and the only girl brave enough to partner with him for the disastrously flammable lab experiment. Only, Emily should be halfway across the country, working as a marine biologist and most definitely not vacationing in her own present timeline. I had booked a trip to ancient Egypt. Emily sounded flustered, with a note of panic he'd never heard before. Except, instead of pyramids and pharaohs, I'm in this weird metal room, so out of desperation, I decided to call every number in my contacts, and this is the only number that worked. Jim gripped the edge of his desk. Emily, listen to me carefully, he said, his voice low and urgent. You need to stay calm and tell me exactly where you are. Do you see anything around you that might look like a control panel or a console of some sort? There's some kind of circular screen, Emily replied, her voice filled with growing fear. Wait, are those stars? Oh my God, Jim, I think I'm in space. Space? Jim echoed weakly, mind reeling. Aliens, time travel, Emily in a freaking spaceship. How are you calling from space? Jim wondered. I don't know, Emily replied. I just called this customer service number and it worked. Today was rapidly turning into the worst workday of his life. Okay, Emily, remember those alien movies we used to watch? Please tell me those buttons aren't red. Red? There was a rustling sound, then a gasp. Jim, there are so many red buttons. And squishy things with eyes. Jim swallowed hard. Blurg, he hissed into the headset, a wave of nausea rising in him. Your tourist didn't just hop a few centuries, you sent her onto an alien spaceship. A chorus of frantic squeaks and clicks reached his ears as Blurg presumably lost his composure with his colleagues. Emily, Jim forced himself to focus as panic threatened to overwhelm him. I need you to listen very carefully. Don't touch anything, especially not the red buttons. Okay, Emily breathed. I'm not touching anything, but I think the squishy things are getting closer. One has a lot of teeth. Jim fought to keep his voice even. He'd reassured irate aliens, handled time-displaced flora enthusiasts, and even navigated a warrior's desire for a death metal pizza party. But this was way outside his job description. Jim, Emily's voice was small now. What did you get up to after high school? Did you ever become an astronaut? Because this is feeling a bit like being an astronaut without any of the training. A twisted sense of humour bubbled up amidst the growing sense of disaster. You could say I work in the travel industry, he replied, trying for a light tone he absolutely didn't feel. Maybe I should look for their return policy, she said, then gave a shaky laugh. Seriously, Jim, is this some kind of joke? Because it's really not funny. I wish it was, Emily, he sighed. But right now, I just need you to stay calm and stall for time. Can you do that for me? A long silence stretched between them. Then finally, Emily spoke, her voice stronger. Yeah, Jim, I think I can. And in that moment, amidst the chaos and absurdity, Jim found a flicker of hope. Emily Martin had survived far worse than an exploding hairpiece. If anyone could handle being accidentally stranded on an alien spaceship, it was her. The headset crackled to life, Blurg's voice a chaotic symphony of squeaks and burbles. Jim, we must resolve this immediately. The, natives are becoming restless. Can you explain to your friend the severity of the situation? Jim gritted his teeth. Way ahead of you, Blurg. Jim instantly switched channels. Emily, bad news, the company you booked with? They're not exactly on the up and up. And those squishy things with eyes surrounding you? Yeah, they're the owners of this ship. Aliens? Emily breathed. Then a note of determination entered her voice. Actual aliens, okay. Okay, I can work with this. Jim, I'm a marine biologist, remember? I handle weird creatures all the time. There was a pause, then. So how conversational are these aliens? And do they like snacks? Jim relayed the question, wincing at the chorus of horrified squawks that erupted from Blurg. Yet, in that moment, a wave of relief washed over him. Emily was scared, yes, but not defeated. She was already problem-solving, adapting, the way she always had. My boss says, well, the universal translator's a bit wonky, so snacks might not be the best diplomatic tactic. Jim relayed the information, feeling both incredibly absurd and oddly focused. He suggests offering them something shiny. Apparently they have a thing for reflective objects. Shiny, Emily murmured. Hang on, maybe there's something in my travel bag. The urgency in her voice was now unmistakable. He could almost picture her rummaging through her belongings, that same determined glint in her eye she'd have whenever they were facing an impossible deadline in chemistry class. Emily, he ventured, a kernel of a plan forming in his mind. I saw one of your social media updates not long ago. Remember that mermaid keychain you got at the aquarium last year that you gawked over for like a month? There was a startled gasp, followed by a giggle. Oh my God, Jim, you're a genius. Who knew tacky souvenirs would be the key to interstellar diplomacy? A surge of adrenaline pulsed through Jim's veins. This was insane, ridiculous, and it might just work. Emily stood her ground, the mermaid keychain dangling from her outstretched hand. The alien creature's bulbous eyes glinting on fleshy stalks hissed and chittered, their many limbs waving in agitation. Clearly, the keychain was not having the desired calming effect. Maybe I should try waving it, Emily whispered, a bead of sweat trickling down her temple. Or offer it with a bow. Are these ones into formalities? Emily, Jim's strained voice echoed through the headset. My boss says no sudden movements. Apparently, bowing translates to a challenge in their culture. Lovely, Emily muttered. Then inspiration struck. Music! Creatures bond over music, right? Even in space. Before Jim could respond, she cleared her throat and began to sing. Not a pop song or some classical piece, but a silly sea shanty she'd picked up on a research trip, complete with nonsensical lyrics and a jaunty tune. Silence fell over the spaceship. The aliens froze, their eyes locked on Emily. Slowly one of them extended a tentative appendage toward the keychain, its iridescent scales catching the light. A collective sigh echoed through the headset. Blurg's voice crackled, equal parts relief and awe. She's singing to them, and it's working. Jim grinned. That's Emily for you. As Emily continued her off-key serenade, the aliens gathered closer, their hisses softening into curious chirps. One particularly bold creature even began to sway rhythmically, its bulbous body wobbling in a way that was strangely endearing. "Jim!" Blurg squeaked, a hint of desperation in his voice. "Get your friend off the ship. We need to initiate the temporal reset protocol immediately, before—" A deafening boom cut him off. The ship lurched violently, throwing Emily off balance. The keychain clattered to the floor. The aliens screeched, their newfound tranquility replaced by raw panic. "Emily!" Jim shouted, the headset pulsing with frantic warnings. "Get out of there, now!" The floor tilted beneath her. Warning lights pulsed a blinding red, and alarms shrieked in a language Emily couldn't begin to comprehend. The aliens scattered, their hisses turning into terrified squeals. "Jim, what's happening?" she yelled, stumbling against a blinking control panel. Her hands grazed cold metal and unfamiliar buttons. "My boss says there's been an external impact. The temporal reset's been disrupted." Jim's voice was barely distinguishable over the din. "Emily, you need to get to an escape pod. Now." "But what about the aliens? And—" Emily's eyes scanned the chaos for her abandoned keychain. "Mermaid diplomacy." "Forget diplomacy," Jim shouted. "Survival is our new itinerary, remember?" Panic gave way to a strange sense of determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. A ship full of panicking aliens, a time anomaly she was partially responsible for. This was officially bigger than anything she'd encountered in the depths of the ocean. "All right, Jim," she said, her voice steadier now. "You're my space travel agent. Talk me through it." Through the noise, Jim's instructions filtered into her ear. A bewildering series of corridors, flashing signs she couldn't read, and more than one close encounter with the panicked, squishy aliens. Finally, she burst into a chamber lined with what could only be escape pods, sleek, egg-shaped vessels with blinking interfaces. Jim's voice echoed, tinny and distant. "Okay, the blue panel controls the launch sequence, and the navigation interface should be—" His instructions trailed off into static. Emily swore. No time to wait for clearer directions. Instincts took over. She punched wildly at buttons, the interface flashing in response. A trajectory line appeared amidst a star map. But where was safe? Her eyes fell upon a small blue planet at the edge of the map. It was familiar, comforting. "Home," she whispered, then slammed her fist down on the launch button. The escape pod hurtled through the distorted space-time fabric, leaving the alien ship and its madness far behind. Emily gripped the armrests until her knuckles turned white. Her stomach churned as the pod twisted and bucked, stars smearing into blinding streaks of light. Suddenly the turbulence stopped. The pod shuddered once, twice, then settled with a quiet hiss. She cautiously cracked open the hatch. Sunlight, blue sky, birdsong, and the unmistakable, slightly musty scent of the ocean. Emily was home, back in her own timeline. Shaking, she stumbled out of the pod and collapsed onto the soft sand. She'd barely processed the escape before the weight of it all washed over her, and she began to laugh, the laughter turning into helpless sobs. "Are you all right, miss?" A gentle voice broke through the haze. Emily looked up to see a middle-aged woman with a concerned frown, a small dog at her side sniffing at the pod with curiosity. I think so," Emily managed, swiping at her tears. "I just had the strangest vacation." Back at Xylostar Vacations, Jim's headset was silent. Blurg and his colleagues huddled around monitors, their tentacles a flurry of motion. The temporal anomaly that had been Emily Martin blipped, then faded completely. "She's gone?" Blurg squeaked, disbelief echoing in his voice. Jim leaned back in his chair, relief and exhaustion warring within him. "Looks like it." An image of Emily rose to his mind, her laughter, her courage, the off-key way she'd faced down a spaceship full of aliens. A smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Perhaps," Blurg began hesitantly, "perhaps we should reconsider the limited humans allowed policy. This one proved remarkably resourceful." Jim couldn't help but agree. After all, who better to handle the unexpected twists and turns of time travel tourism than someone who'd survived Mr. Jenkins' chemistry class, a spaceship full of panicking aliens, and an interdimensional escape? Jim walked into work the next day with a wry smile. He was ready for anything. "Jim," Blurg's voice crackled through the headset. "Incoming call." "Greetings, valued client of Xylostar Vacations," Jim began. "How can I assist you today?" "Yes," began the voice, strained with panic. "Did I sign up for the right package? 'Cause I'm in Pompeii for some reason, and I think that volcano thingy is about to—" A deafening boom cut him off, followed by a chorus of terrified screams. Jim sighed. So much for a slow start. Yet, as his day filled up with refund requests and frantic inquiries, his mind drifted to the woman who had inadvertently taken the most extraordinary vacation in history. He wondered where Emily was now, probably back to studying sea creatures and laughing over the story of her accidental space adventure. A job at Xylostar Vacations wasn't for everyone, but for as long as he could handle the job, it would be his calling.